Don't you think it's weird to throw a celebration for us? I mean, we haven't done anything heroic in years. What if everyone thinks we're washed up? Oh, what if we are washed up?
Insomniac's Ratchet and Clank is a franchise that's been going on since 2002 back on the PlayStation 2. This is a video game franchise that I have a lot of memories with. It's something that was one of my first games playing back on the PlayStation 2. Something that I don't think enough people give credit to the PlayStation 2 is the fact that it housed some of the best 3D platformers that I played. Things like the Jack and Daxter franchise, Ratchet and Clank, things like this that again like people I think overlook or don't really bring into conversation with PlayStation, specifically the PlayStation 2 era, because that's kind of really Nintendo's like wheelhouse. Nintendo's a platformer guy. They do all the best platformers. I think Insomniac's Ratchet and Clank definitely fits the mold as some of the best 3D platforming I've ever played in a game, and I absolutely love it. Something that I don't normally accredit Ratchet and Clank to is like being this big technologically advanced game that pushes hardware to its limits. So it was really interesting when I would first started watching reviews of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, and a lot of the reviews were touting how this is the first true next generation experience. And it's just something that for me was really hard to connect in my brain, that Ratchet and Clank could be this big, foray into the next generation. Because for me, it's just more of like a very traditional 3D platform that's very accessible to a lot of people. But when I played it, I quickly understood what everyone was talking about. From the art direction to the graphics to the sound effects to how quickly and smooth the game plays and seamlessly runs from gameplay to cutscene to gameplay, almost as if you're really playing out these scenarios that would normally be relegated to QTEs or to just straight just cutscenes. So we can see the potential of where Sony's trying to take the PlayStation generation, where PlayStation 5 hopefully is going to end up being at the end of its generation, is the complete transformation of what Sony's been trying to accomplish since the PlayStation 2. And that's having these interactive deep stories that blend perfectly with the gameplay to create a seamless experience that doesn't just say, here's the game and here's the scenes that you're rewarded with. Instead, you kind of are treated to an experience, a level of immersion that again only games can provide. And that's something that I feel like Sony's been striving to achieve for a really long time. And I feel like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart definitely achieves the goal of, again, perfectly blending cinematics with gameplay, where it doesn't just feel like you're watching these cutscenes, you're just kind of interacting with them and engaging with them. And obviously what is a very curated experience, but it is an experience nonetheless. Something that I've made a point to mention time and time again throughout this video is the fact that Ratchet and Clank has its roots back on the PlayStation 2. That this is something that Sony's been trying to achieve since the PlayStation 2. And the reason why I've mentioned the PlayStation 2 so often is because whenever I was playing Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, even though it is this very cinematic, it's very colorful, artsy, graphically intense game, there's something in the formula, there's something deeply embedded in the game design and the level designs and the characters that feels so much like 2002 PlayStation 2 era of gaming. From some of the weird glitchy stuff that really shouldn't be possible to a lot of the characters and their humor. A lot of this game feels to me like Ratchet and Clank back on the PlayStation 2, Ratchet and Clank on the PlayStation 3, just cleaned up and made to look more modern for a PlayStation 5 audience. Yes, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is a true next-gen experience on the PlayStation 5 and PC if you have the right builds for it. It is that experience, but at its deepest core, I do believe that this is still that traditional PlayStation 2 Ratchet and Clank that Insomniac has been working on and making since 2002. And for me, it's a level of like, wow, mind-blowing. This is like surreal that this is really happening and I'm really experiencing this and seeing this level of next gen. But it also has this like nostalgic feeling, this feeling of wow, even though this is something different and new, it's still very much very familiar to what I know and what these characters have been, you know, since I was a kid. Alright, so a lot of that was more vague about the experience and more about just how it made me feel and a lot of things that like wowed me. But if we're talking about like specific moments, specific things that make this game just so freaking fantastic, we gotta start with the opening. I'd be remiss if I went through this entire video and I did not talk about one of the best video game openings I've experienced in like so freaking long. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart starts off with a tutorial like any video game would, like specifically any Ratchet and Clank video game does, and they always have these really cool fun ways to do their tutorials that kind of engage the player with the gameplay without ever taking you out of it. And Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart does it in a very ceremonious way, and I mean that literally. You're literally in a ceremony that is there to celebrate Ratchet and Clank as heroes within the video game, but also, and maybe I'm looking a little bit too deep into this, I really have like my cinema brain on whenever I'm playing Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, because something that I feel like this ceremony is also accomplishing is it's breaking the fourth wall. Not only are the characters in the game being celebrated for their heroics, but us as an audience, Insomniac as a development team, is also celebrating Ratchet and Clank as an IP, as a franchise that has stood the test of time within PlayStation. It has been going on for 2 decades and it's still holding on strong and it's still relevant, and that's really impressive to say, specifically for a Sony PlayStation IP, because Sony doesn't like to carry on a lot of their IPs, and Ratchet and Clank is one of the few that have lasted since the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 5. So it's definitely a ceremony, not just in the game, but for us as players, for the development team, and just overall the fact that Ratchet and Clank is still around, as well as it's kind of this big welcome back party. Like, you know, we did miss Ratchet and Clank. I haven't played a Ratchet and Clank since back on PlayStation 3, so it's been a while, and I definitely missed seeing them and playing them. And overall, again, this whole opening sequence is just some of the best opening sequence I've ever seen. The gameplay tutorial is very engaging, and it does good by explaining things to you for any new players who never really played one, but also not really babying you. You know, this is a long franchise. This has been going on for a while, so I do think Insomniac is aware of the fact that a lot of people who are hopping into Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart have played Ratchet and Clank back on the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, or just sometime within their lifespan they probably played something similar to this. So it doesn't take too long, and it doesn't try to baby you. It just tries to reward you with really cool moments, really cool fanfare, and overall I just love it. We can't talk about Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart without talking about my favorite character in this game, and that's Rivet. Rivet absolutely stole the show. She has such a harrowing backstory, such a cool character, from the design to her personality. I love her backstory. It's just such a great addition to Ratchet and Clank. I feel like it is really hard to introduce a new character, specifically a new character that is supposed to be looked at as one of the main protagonists in this decade-old franchise, and Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart's Rivet definitely seamlessly fits into not just the story, but the lore of the world. Definitely the dynamic between Rivet and Ratchet, Rivet and Clank. Everyone just kind of really fits so naturally that it feels like she was always a part of this world, and she wasn't really just added on in 2023, as if she was there since 2002 in her own multiverse or whatever, but like she existed, and that's what makes it feel so natural. The only thing that I feel like is kind of amiss with this whole dynamic of playing Rivet some story points, playing Ratchet some story points, is the fact that they play practically identical. There's no really difference within their arsenal, within their movements, within anything really. So it just feels like I'm playing like another copy of Ratchet. And I would have rathered had they had two completely different, like maybe arsenals or movesets, and that the specific segments were curated for that specific character. I feel like that would have worked out a little bit better in making the whole switching from character to character a little bit more dynamic. But again, that for me is just my opinion. I feel like that's just a missed opportunity, and hopefully that's something that they could work on in the future of making this game just a slightly better version, in my opinion.
Hey, it's okay. See? Just me. Rivet? Shh. Gotta go. Here, it'll help you get home. I designed it to be one size fits all, so it should... Thank you.
One final point I want to talk about what makes this game so special and so, I think, next gen, maybe evolutionary to the Ratchet and Clank formula, is how seamless some of the gameplay to cutscene is. It almost feels like, again, yes, it's curated, but it definitely has this level of immersion that doesn't give you enough control to really deviate from what's happening, but gives you enough control where you feel like this is really happening to you. And then if you mix that in with the DualSense controllers technology, the rumble, the like haptic triggers, all of that definitely works in tandem together. And Insomniac, in my opinion, made a piece of software that is very specifically designed for the hardware in mind. I feel like when people say that Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart can happen on the PlayStation 4, you can play it on the PC, you can play it on, it's possible in other ways. Yeah, maybe they would have had to dial back so many things that I feel like would have taken away from the overall experience, where it wouldn't really be Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart anymore. If you couldn't have those seamless transitions from gameplay to cutscene, then you wouldn't really have Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. I think it relies so heavily on the technology that is utilizing from the PlayStation 5, from the DualSense, that if you were to take all that away, you would just have any other Ratchet and Clank game. It would have been great on its own merits still, but it would have lost that little bit of luxury value. It would have lost that luster that really makes this game stand out within a long history of Ratchet and Clank games. When I look at Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, I say it stacks up among some of my favorite Ratchet and Clanks, like Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal, Ratchet and Clank A Crack in Time. All these games, I feel like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart definitely lives up to the name that Ratchet and Clank has built, and is by far one of my favorites. Overall, these have been my final thoughts. Do I recommend Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart? Yes, I do recommend this game to anyone who has the opportunity to play it. But more so, I recommend it on the specified hardware that is the PlayStation 5. If you have a PC, do your best to try to emulate the PlayStation 5 technology with an SSD, with hopefully something close to a DualSense, or ideally a DualSense controller, because all of these add into the experience of Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. I don't think it is the game alone. I definitely think the hardware as well makes the game stand out slightly above other Ratchet and Clank games. But again, overall, if you get the opportunity to play Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, do so. That's going to end this video. I'll see you guys on the next one.